The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, transmitted across 300 light-years of space. It landed in the communications array of the Earth Defense Network headquarters in Geneva, where Lieutenant Sungmin Bei stared at his screen with growing confusion. The transmission was enormous, containing what appeared to be legal documents, historical records, and something that looked suspiciously like a bill. Sungmin forwarded it up the chain of command without comment. Within an hour, it sat on the desk of Commander Hoyan Woo Kim, who read through the contents with an expression that never changed. His office overlooked the sprawling military complex, but his eyes stayed fixed on the screen. The message came from something calling itself the Galactic Council. They claimed to represent 847 species across known space. They had been watching humanity's expansion for the past 50 years. Now, they had decided it was time to make contact. Hyunhwa read the demands 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. Humanity was to cease all colonization immediately. Every human world beyond the Sol system would be evaluated for compliance with Council standards. Humanity would pay an entrance fee of 40% of Earth's gross planetary product for the next century. Council military bases would be established on Mars, Europa, and Titan. Human ships would require Council permits to leave their own solar system. Earth's government would be restructured to align with Council administrative protocols. In exchange, humanity would receive the Council's protection, access to their trade networks, and the privilege of petitioning for limited self-governance after a probationary period of 500 years. Hyunwoo forwarded the message to President Min Ji-kwon without adding his own thoughts. He had learned long ago that his personal opinions carried weight, and this decision needed to come from civilian leadership. But he allowed himself a small smile as he imagined the president's reaction. The emergency cabinet meeting lasted 6 hours. President Kwon sat at the head of the table, reading sections of the council's demands aloud. Some of her advisors argued for immediate response. Others suggested opening dialogue to understand the council's intentions better. Dr. Sora Han, the chief xenology advisor, warned that any response would set a precedent for future relations. "They're treating us like children," Ambassador Gina Park said quietly. She had spent 40 years in diplomatic service before retiring. The president had called her back for this meeting specifically. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a decree. They're telling us we have no choice. We should at least respond," argued the Secretary of Commerce. Ignoring them could be seen as hostile. Gina shook her head. "Responding validates their authority over us. The moment we engage, we accept the premise that they have the right to make these demands." President Kwon looked at Commander Hyunwoo, who had been invited to observe. "Commander, your military assessment?" Hyunwoo stood, activating a holographic display. "The Council fleet positions suggest they control most of the galaxy's core sectors. However, their expansion patterns show they avoid conflict. Every species they've contacted has joined peacefully. They have no recent combat experience that we can detect." "And if we refuse?" the president asked. "They'll escalate. But how they escalate will tell us everything we need to know about them." Hyunwoo paused. "If they're truly as powerful as they claim, they won't need to negotiate. If they do try to negotiate, it means they're not as strong as they want us to believe." The vote was unanimous. Earth would send no response. 3 months passed. The Council sent a second message, more insistent than the first. It included visual records of other species joining the Council, all appearing prosperous and content. It emphasized the benefits of membership and the dangers of isolation. It set a deadline of 30 days for Earth's response. The message was filed and ignored. At 60 days, a third transmission arrived. The tone had shifted from welcoming to irritated. The Council reminded humanity that every species eventually joined. Resistance was inefficient. They extended the deadline another 60 days and warned that continued silence would be interpreted as hostility. Captain Yoonji Lee read the intercepted transmission aboard her ship, the Indomitable, currently on patrol near the human colony of New Busan. She had been in space for 15 years, commanding various vessels, and had never encountered another intelligent species. Now, apparently, there were 847 of them, and they were annoyed that humanity wasn't answering their calls. She shared the message with her crew. They laughed about it during dinner. The idea that someone 300 light years away was angry about being ignored struck them as absurd. They had work to do, colonies to protect, and patrol routes to complete. Some distant council could wait. Back on Earth, Dr. Sorahan studied every piece of data they had on the council. She analyzed their ship designs, their language patterns, their bureaucratic structures. Everything pointed to an organization that had grown soft over millennia of unchallenged authority. They had protocols for everything, forms for every situation, and apparently no experience with species that simply refused to participate. "They're not equipped for this," she told President Kwan during a private briefing. "Their entire system assumes compliance. They don't have a framework for dealing with refusal." 6 months after the first message, the Council sent their fourth and final communication. The diplomatic language was gone. They demanded immediate response. They invoked ancient laws and treaties that humanity had never signed. They set a final deadline of 30 days. After that, it would be forced to take action to ensure galactic stability and order. Commander Hyenwu read the message and immediately began moving ships. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for orders. He simply activated contingency plans that had been prepared months ago. Stealth frigates moved into position along every major approach to human space. Defense stations powered up weapons that had never been fired in anger. Colonies activated their defense grids. Admiral Tae-Young Choi, head of the Earth Defense Fleet, watched the ship movements on his tactical display. "You think they'll actually come?" "They've invested too much authority in this," Hyenwu replied. "If they back down now, it undermines everything they've built. They'll come. They'll bring enough ships to intimidate us, and they'll expect us to fold when we see their fleet. And when we don't?" Hyenwu pulled up a star chart showing Council space. "Then we'll learn if they can actually fight, or if they've just been bullying everyone for 50,000 years. The 30-day deadline passed in silence. Earth sent no response. Human colonies continued expanding. New ships launched from orbital shipyards. Life continued as if the Council didn't exist in the Council chambers. 847 species watched in growing confusion as their messages were ignored. High Arbiter Quevin, who had led the Council for 3,000 years, felt something he hadn't experienced in living memory: uncertainty. "They must respond," Council Overseer Thalman insisted. "Every species responds. It's what species do." "Perhaps they didn't receive the messages," suggested another Council member weakly. "They received them," Quaven said quietly. "They read them, and they chose not to answer." "Then we have no choice," Thalman declared. "We send the negotiation fleet. We go to their homeworld. We make them understand." The vote was called. 200 ships would be dispatched to the Sol system. It was the largest fleet the Council had assembled in 5,000 years. Surely, the humans would see reason when faced with such overwhelming force. Commander Hyenwu received the intelligence report as the Council. They would arrive in 4 weeks. He allowed himself another rare smile and sent a single message to all human fleet commanders. "Contact incoming. Maintain silence. Prepare for guests." The Council fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 200 ships, each one a masterpiece of engineering, appeared at the edge of the Sol system in a carefully choreographed display of power. Their hulls gleamed in the distant sunlight. Their weapons remained powered down, a gesture of peaceful intent. Fleet Master Drenak stood on the bridge of his flagship, admiring the view of Earth's sun. "Begin broadcasting," he ordered. Standard Greeting Protocol 7. Emphasize our peaceful intentions and our patience with their earlier silence. The message went out in 100 languages, including the human tongues they had studied. It expressed disappointment at humanity's lack of response, but offered renewed friendship and guidance. It requested that Earth send representatives to the flagship for preliminary discussions. It was polite, firm, and carried the weight of 50,000 years of diplomatic tradition. What came back was nothing. Drenak waited an hour before sending the message again. Surely there had been some technical error. Perhaps human communications equipment was not compatible with Council systems. He had his technicians modify the transmission frequency and sent it again. Still nothing. "Sir," his communications officer said nervously, "I'm detecting multiple energy signatures throughout the system. Hundreds of them." "Show me," Drennick ordered. The tactical display updated, and Drennick felt his breathing slow. Ships. Thousands of ships. They had been there all along. Hidden by some technology the Council's sensors had failed to detect. Now they were decloaking, surrounding the Council fleet in a sphere of military power that made Drennick's carefully arranged formation look like a child's toy. Captain. Yoonji Lee sat in her command chair aboard the Indomitable. Watching the Council fleet on her screens, the alien ships were larger than hers, more ornate, covered in decorative elements that served no tactical purpose. She had studied their formation during their approach. It was designed for visual impact, not combat efficiency. "They're hailing us," her communications officer reported. "Let it play," Yoonji said, "but don't respond." She listened to the Council's message. The translation software worked perfectly, rendering the alien words into Korean. She noted the tone, the assumptions, the barely concealed condescension. They spoke like parents addressing misbehaving children. "Should we respond, Captain?" asked Lieutenant Jae-Soon Park, her tactical officer. "No," Yoonji said simply. Admiral Choi's orders were clear. Maintain silence. The Council fleet waited. Hours passed. They sent 3 more messages, each one slightly less patient than the last. The human ships remained in position, silent and watching. It was the most unnerving standoff Drennick had ever experienced. Usually there was dialogue, posturing, negotiation. This absolute silence was outside his experience. "Move the fleet toward the 3rd planet," Drennick finally ordered. "Perhaps a show of determination will encourage them to talk." His fleet began moving. Immediately, the human ships adjusted their positions, maintaining their surrounding formation. Drennick continued forward. Surely they would respond now. Surely they would at least demand he stop nothing, Admiral. Tae-Young Choi watched from Earth orbit as the Council fleet advanced. He had fought in the Mars Independence War 30 years ago, back when human factions still fought each other. He understood posturing and brinkmanship. This Council fleet was trying to intimidate without actually threatening. They were pushing boundaries to see where the limits were. "Sir, they're approaching the moon's orbit," his second-in-command reported. "I see it," Tae-Young replied calmly. He opened a channel to Captain Yoonji. "Captain Lee, they need to understand we're serious. Fire a warning shot. Make it count." Yoonji acknowledged the order. She designated one of the Council escort vessels, a smaller ship on the fleet's flank. "Weapons. Target that vessel. 1 shot. Vaporize it." Lieutenant Jae-Soon hesitated. "Sir, that will kill everyone aboard," Yes, Yoonji said quietly. "It will. That's the warning. Fire when ready." The Indomitable's main cannon charged and fired in less than 3 seconds. The beam crossed the distance at near light speed. The Council escort vessel had no shields raised, no defensive posture. It simply ceased to exist, transformed into expanding vapor and debris. Every screen in the STO's fleet lit up with damage alerts and shocked communications. Drennick stared at the empty space where one of his ships had been. One moment it was there. The next, gone. No warning, no demand to halt, no negotiation. Just immediate, overwhelming violence. "I'll stop," he ordered. All ships, defensive positions, shields up. His fleet scrambled into a defensive formation, but the human ships didn't move. They maintained their positions, silent and patient. Drennick's hands shook as he tried to process what had happened. They had killed 140 of his crew members without a word. "Get me a channel to the humans," he demanded. Now. His communications officer worked frantically. "Sir, I have multiple human ships on open channels." "What should I say?" "Demand an explanation. Ask why they fired on us without warning." The message went out. Drennick waited, his heart's pounding. Surely now they would respond. Surely now there would be dialogue. Silence after an act of war was unthinkable. The response came from Admiral Tae-Young himself. It was a single word, transmitted clearly in the Council's primary language. No. Drenak stared at the transmission log. No? What does that mean? No what? Nobody on his bridge could answer. The human fleet remained in position. Hours passed. Drenak sent 17 more messages, each one demanding explanation, dialogue, negotiation, anything. Each one was met with silence or that single word. No. Commander Hyanwu monitored the situation from his command center. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, he watched the Council fleet's movements, their communications patterns, their growing panic. They were trying to apply their diplomatic frameworks to a situation that existed outside those frameworks. It was like watching someone try to use a key on a door that had no lock. Sir, we're intercepting internal Council communications, his intelligence officer reported. They're confused. They don't understand why we're not talking to them. Of course they don't, Hyanwu said. Talking implies we accept their authority to demand our attention. Show me their fleet disposition. The tactical display showed the Council ships in a tight defensive formation. They were protecting themselves, not preparing to attack. Good. That meant they were starting to understand. On the third day of the standoff, Drenak tried a different approach. He broadcast a message to all human ships simultaneously, bypassing military channels and sending it on public frequencies where civilians might hear it. People of Earth, we come in peace. We offer friendship and partnership. Please, we only wish to talk. Tell us what we have done wrong. Tell us how to make this right. We will listen to any demands. We will negotiate any terms. Please, just speak to us. Captain Yunji listened to the message. It sounded desperate, pleading. She almost felt sorry for them. Almost, should we respond, Captain? Lieutenant Jae-soon asked Yun-G thought about it. The Council had arrived in their system uninvited. They had assumed authority they had never earned. They had demanded submission from a species that had never met them. And now, faced with resistance, they were begging for dialogue. Oh, she said, let them wait. Admiral Tae-young agreed. They need to understand that we don't owe them conversation. They need to learn that demanding an audience doesn't create an obligation to provide one. The standoff continued. Council ships remained in their defensive formation. Human ships remained in their surrounding positions. No shots were fired. No words were exchanged. The silence stretched on. On the fifth day, Drenak received orders from the Council homeworld. He was to withdraw immediately. The mission was a failure. The negotiation fleet had failed to negotiate. Because the other side refused to acknowledge there was anything to negotiate about. Prepare for hyperspace jump, Drenak ordered quietly. All ships were going home. His fleet formed up and jumped out of the system in the same perfect formation they had arrived in. The human ships watched them go in silence. When the last Council vessel vanished, Captain Yunji allowed herself a small smile. Stand down from alert status. Resume normal patrol, her crew cheered. They had faced down 847 species without firing more than one shot and without saying more than one word. It was Yunji thought. Possibly the most efficient military operation in human history, Admiral Tae-young sent a message to all fleet commanders. The Council will be back. They'll need to understand what happened here. And when they figure it out, they'll realize they made a terrible mistake. Commander Hyanwu read the after-action reports with satisfaction. The Council had learned that humanity could not be intimidated. Soon they would learn something far more important. They would learn that humanity could not be understood through their usual frameworks, and that lack of understanding would terrify them more than any weapon. Fleetmaster Drenak returned to Council space in shame. He had failed the simplest of diplomatic missions. He hadn't even managed to start a conversation. As his ship docked at the Council station, he wondered how he would explain to 847 species that humans had defeated him with silence. Dr. Sorahan stood before the Council's Central Intelligence Division, trying to explain her decision. She had defected 3 months ago, bringing with her complete copies of Earth's historical databases. At the time, she believed she was preventing a war. Now, watching the Council researchers react to human history, she wondered if she had started one instead. This cannot be accurate, researcher Plixstar said, his translator rendering his distress clearly. He was a Valkyrie, same species as Council Overseer Thelman, and he had spent 6 weeks analyzing human records. These numbers, these conflicts, they must be errors in translation. Sora shook her head. The numbers are correct. Humanity has been in a state of warfare for most of its recorded history. Plixstar pulled up a display showing human conflicts across 10,000 years. But there are thousands of wars here. Thousands. My species has fought 3 wars in our entire history. 3. And we considered that excessive. Different species develop differently, Sora said. Though her voice lacked conviction, looking at human history through alien eyes, she was beginning to see why they were frightened. Another researcher, floating jellyfish-like creature named Quilm, drifted closer to examine the data. This war here labeled World War II, the casualties number, in the tens of millions. And it occurred less than 600 years ago? Yes, Sora confirmed. And after this war, humans built weapons that could destroy their entire planet? Yes. And then continued building more weapons? Yes, Quilm floated backward, its bioluminescent patterns flickering in what Sora had learned was fear. Why would any species do this? Sora pulled up another file. Because the alternative was allowing their enemies to build the weapons first. Human philosophy includes something called mutually assured destruction. The idea that if everyone has enough weapons to destroy everyone else, nobody will use them. That's insane, Plixstar said flatly. That's human, Sora replied. Councilmember Vesic reviewed the reports in his private chambers. He was old even by council standards, having served for over 2,000 years. He had seen species join the council peacefully. He had seen the occasional stubborn holdout require economic pressure or mild military displays. He had never seen anything like this. The humans were wrong. Everything about them was wrong. They thought wrong. They fought wrong. They organized their societies wrong. They had concepts that didn't exist in any other known language. Words like freedom and liberty that they elevated to nearly religious status. Vesic opened a file titled Human Philosophical Concepts. The researchers had compiled it from analyzing human literature and political documents. He read slowly, trying to understand. Give me liberty or give me death. A human named Dongjun had said that before humans even had spaceflight. Not give me liberty or give me reasonable terms. Let's negotiate the conditions of liberty. Just a simple binary choice between freedom and death. Another quote. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Self-evident. Not negotiable, not subject to discussion, not open to compromise. Self-evident. Vesic found the concept disturbing. The entire council system was based on negotiation, compromise, and graduated authority. Nothing was self-evident. Everything was subject to discussion and treaty. But humans seemed to have certain ideas they considered beyond negotiation. War, Coordinator Brechthal, had no such philosophical concerns. He stood before the full council assembly, presenting his analysis with military precision. The human fleet that surrounded our negotiation force consisted of approximately 2,000 vessels. Based on their technology, each one carries weapons capable of destroying a planet. They have stealth systems we cannot detect. They have response times that suggest either faster-than-light communication or pre-positioned battle plans. He changed the display. More concerning is their strategic doctrine. We've analyzed their military history. They don't fight to achieve negotiating positions. They fight to win completely. Unconditional surrender is a common theme in their warfare. High Arbiter, Quen leaned forward. Surely they must negotiate eventually. All conflicts end in negotiation. Not human conflicts, Brechthal replied. Or rather, their negotiations only begin after one side is completely defeated. They have a saying, peace through victory, not peace through compromise. Victory. Council Overseer Thalman stood abruptly. This is why we must act now, before they become stronger. A preemptive strike while we still have numerical superiority, Numerical superiority means nothing if our ships can't find theirs, Brechthel countered. Their stealth technology is decades ahead of ours. And even if we could find them, our forces are designed for peacekeeping and occupation. We haven't fought a real war in 12,000 years. Then we learn, Thalman insisted. We adapt. We cannot allow a species this dangerous to exist unchecked. Researcher Plixstar stood to present his findings. His appendages trembled as he spoke. I've completed my analysis of human psychology. I believe the Council has fundamentally misunderstood what we're dealing with. The assembly quieted. Plixstar activated a display showing human brain scans and chemical analyses. Humans are persistence predators. On their homeworld, they hunted prey by chasing it until it collapsed from exhaustion. This hunting strategy required something unique, the ability to hold on to an idea or goal, despite overwhelming physical feedback demanding they stop. He showed neurological comparisons. Most species, when faced with extreme stress, pain, or fear, experience a shutdown response. Fight or flight, followed by submission if neither works. Humans have a third option. They can simply refuse to acknowledge defeat. Their brains produce chemicals that allow them to continue functioning past the point where any other species would have given up. What does this mean practically? Quevin asked. Plixstar's next slide showed historical examples. It means they have documented cases of individuals fighting after sustaining injuries that should have killed them. It means they have soldiers who held positions against impossible odds rather than surrender. It means their entire species has a psychological framework built around the concept of never giving up. He pulled up a human text. They have stories they tell their children. Legends about last stands, hopeless battles, and glorious defeats. They celebrate losing if the loss was heroic enough. They have a cultural obsession with defiance. Councilmember Visek spoke quietly. In other words, they cannot be intimidated. Worse, Plixstar said. They can be intimidated. They can feel fear. But fear doesn't make them submit. It makes them angry. And angry humans are far more dangerous than calm ones. Dr. Sora watched the presentation from the observation gallery. She had known this intellectually, but hearing it explained to aliens made her realize how strange humans truly were. Every other species in the Council had evolved toward cooperation and compromise. Humans had evolved towards stubborn persistence and competitive individualism. The debate raged for hours. War Coordinator Brechthel argued for immediate military action. Councilmember Visek argued for complete withdrawal and leaving humans alone. Thalman wanted economic sanctions. Others suggested various forms of containment. Finally, High Arbiter Quevin called for a vote. We will launch a limited military action, 40% of our total fleet. We will occupy 3 frontier human colonies simultaneously. This will demonstrate our resolve and force them to the negotiating table. The vote passed with a narrow majority. Councilmember Visek abstained, his silence speaking volumes. As the Council dispersed to prepare for war, Sora managed to send an encrypted message to Earth. It was brief and desperate. They don't understand. They think you'll break. They're going to invade. Please, for the sake of both our species, just talk to them. The message was received by Commander Hyenwu. He read it twice, then deleted it without response. Dr. Sora meant well, but she had made the same mistake the Council was making. She thought this was about communication. It wasn't. This was about something much simpler. The Council had claimed authority they didn't have. They had demanded submission they hadn't earned. And now they would learn what happened when you made demands of people who had spent 10,000 years killing anyone who tried to rule them without. Consent.Hyon-Wu pulled up deployment orders for the human fleet. The Council was bringing 40% of their military. 2,000 ships, maybe 3,000. Against humanity's 6,000 warships and another 4,000? In support vessels, the numbers weren't the important part. The important part was that the Council still thought this would end in negotiation. They thought humans would see their fleet and finally agree to talk. They were about to learn that. Humans only negotiated from positions of strength. And right now, humanity was very, very strong. The Council fleet began mobilizing. Researcher Plickstar watched from his laboratory, surrounded by human historical texts and psychological profiles. He had submitted a minority report arguing against military action. It had been ignored. He pulled up one final human quote from a general named Hyanwu from their early space age. "The best way to ensure peace is to be so strong that war becomes unthinkable to your enemies." The humans had taken that advice. They had built their strength in silence. And now the Council was about to make war thinkable? Plickstar feared they would all learn to regret it. The Council fleet struck 3 human colonies simultaneously at dawn. New Busan, Port Haven, and Midway Station all woke to find alien warships in orbit. Supreme General Krathix had planned the operation for 3 months. It was textbook occupation doctrine: overwhelming force, clear demands, minimal casualties. The colonies would surrender within hours. Earth would see reason, and negotiations would finally begin. Nothing went according to plan on New Busan. Colony Administrator Hai Wan-jeng received the Council's surrender demand while eating breakfast. She read it carefully, set down her coffee, and activated the colony defense grid. Then she sent a message to every citizen. "Council forces are demanding our surrender. I have rejected their demand. This is now a combat situation. All civilians to shelters. All militia to your stations. We will not surrender." The Council's landing forces expected panic and chaos. Instead, they found organized resistance. Civilians evacuated in orderly fashion, while militia members took up defensive positions. The Council commander, a veteran of 100 peacekeeping missions, had never seen anything like it. "Broadcast the surrender demand again," he ordered. "Explain that resistance is futile. Explain that we will minimize casualties if they comply now." The broadcast went out. Nobody responded. Instead, the first shots came from concealed positions in the colony's industrial sector. Council soldiers, trained for crowd control and occupation duty, found themselves in actual combat for the first time in their careers. Captain Dayun Song commanded a stealth frigate squadron positioned behind Council lines. She watched their supply convoys moving through space with predictable routes and no escort vessels. They weren't protecting their logistics because they had never needed to before. "Target the supply ship," she ordered. "One shot, then jump out." Her frigate decloaked, fired, and vanished before the Council sensors even registered the attack. The supply ship exploded, taking 3 months of food and ammunition with it. The Yoon squadron jumped to their next position. "Ready to strike again?" Admiral Tae-young coordinated. The overall human response from Earth, he watched the Council's 3-pronged attack and saw the fatal flaw immediately. They had divided their forces, assuming each colony would surrender independently. Instead, they had created 3 separate battles they now had to fight simultaneously. "Send the 4th Fleet to New Busan," he ordered. "2nd Fleet to Port Haven. 6th Fleet to Midway. Surround each Council force and cut off their retreat." Commander Hyanwu implemented the strategy he had planned months ago. It wasn't complex. The Council fleet was large but spread thin. Human forces were smaller but concentrated. More importantly, human commanders actually knew how to fight. "All ships maintain communication silence," he ordered. "Let them talk to themselves." Supreme General Krathix sat in his command ship, trying to understand what was going wrong. His forces on New Busan reported continuous resistance. Civilians were fighting alongside soldiers. Children were carrying supplies to militia positions. The colony had been given every opportunity to surrender with honor, but they refused to even discuss terms. "Increase pressure on their defensive positions," he ordered. "They'll break eventually." It didn't break. Days turned into weeks. Council forces on New Busan controlled the spaceport and 3 industrial zones. But the residential areas remained in human hands. Every attempt to advance met coordinated resistance. Worse, Council casualties were mounting. Not from pitched battles, but from constant small attacks. Snipers, ambushes, improvised explosives. The Council soldiers were demoralized. They had signed up for peacekeeping duties, not war. They were trained to manage occupied populations, not fight determined defenders. And the humans showed no signs of giving up. On Port Haven, the situation was even worse. The colony administrator, a former military officer named Tajen Kwan, had prepared for this scenario. He had stockpiled weapons, trained his civilians, and fortified key positions. When the council demanded surrender, he responded with artillery fire. The council forces retreated to their landing zone and sent desperate messages requesting reinforcement. Tajen sent them a message too, the first human communication the council had received since the war began. It was simple. Leave now or die here. Captain Dayun's stealth frigates continued hunting supply convoys. In 3 months, her squadron had destroyed 47 council ships without losing a single vessel. The council couldn't defend against enemies they couldn't see. Their supply lines collapsed. Food became scarce. Ammunition ran low. Medical supplies dwindled. Supreme General Krathik sent request after request to Earth begging for negotiation. Each message was ignored. He tried broadcasting on civilian channels, military channels, emergency frequencies. He sent messages in every human language. He even had his linguists compose poetry, thinking perhaps humans appreciated artistic communication. Nothing. Just silence and continued attacks. Admiral. Taeyong watched the council's growing desperation with clinical interest. They kept trying to establish communication because their entire military doctrine assumed warfare was just aggressive negotiation. They couldn't conceive of fighting without talking. Sir, council forces on Midway are requesting permission to withdraw, his communications officer reported. Deny them, Taeyong said. Surround their landing zone. Let them sit there and think about their situation. On Midway Station, council troops huddled in their defensive perimeter, surrounded by human forces. They weren't being attacked. The humans were just waiting, watching. It was psychological torture for soldiers trained to negotiate and peacekeep. Not to endure siege warfare, Commander Hwanwoo pushed deeper into council space. His fleet struck military supply depots, training facilities, and communications hubs. He avoided civilian targets entirely. This wasn't about conquest. It was about eliminating the council's ability to threaten humanity. Each attack was met with council requests for dialogue. Hwanwoo ignored them all. He had learned that silence was a weapon. Every unanswered message made the council more desperate, more confused, more likely to make mistakes. Council member Vesic watched the war reports with growing horror. 40% of the council's military was trapped in human space or scattered defending against raids. Casualties were mounting. And still, the humans had not said a single word about terms, conditions, or demands. They're not trying to negotiate better terms, he told the council assembly. They're trying to eliminate us as a threat entirely. Possible, Thalman argued. Every war ends in negotiation. They must have demands. They must want something. They want us to leave them alone, Vesic said. That's their demand. That's been their demand from the beginning. We refused to hear it because it wasn't phrased as a negotiation. Supreme General Krathix lost 60% of his fleet in the first 6 months. The remaining 40% was scattered, demoralized, and running out of supplies. His soldiers on the 3 occupied colonies sent him desperate messages. They were surrounded, outnumbered. The humans showed no mercy to forces that wouldn't retreat. He tried one more time to establish communication. He broadcast on every frequency, using every language, employing every diplomatic protocol known to the council. Please, just tell us what you want. We will negotiate any terms. We will meet any reasonable demands. We will grant you independence, sovereignty, anything. Just speak to us. Captain Yoonji Lee heard the message aboard the Indomitable. Her ship was part of the blockade around Midway Station. She had watched council soldiers starve for 3 months because their leaders refused to order a retreat that would acknowledge defeat. Should we respond, Captain? Her communications officer asked. Yoon-G thought about Administrator Haiwan on New Busan, still fighting despite council occupation. She thought about the families who had lost loved ones because the council thought it could impose its will through force. She thought about the sheer arrogance of arriving uninvited and demanding submission. No, she said. Let them figure it out themselves. After 8 months of war, the Council had lost 3,000 ships, controlled no human territory despite occupying 3 colonies, and had suffered 50,000 casualties. Human losses were minimal by comparison. 400 ships, 8,000 soldiers, and not a single colony surrendered. High Arbiter Quevin called an emergency council session. The assembly was in chaos. Member species were questioning council authority. Some were demanding immediate withdrawal. Others wanted total war. Nobody could agree because they were dealing with something unprecedented. Species that wouldn't negotiate. Supreme General Krathix made his decision without council approval. He ordered all forces to withdraw from human space. He ordered all raids to cease. And then he did something no council military leader had done in 12,000 years. He personally took his command ship to Earth. He broadcast his intention on every channel. He explained that he was coming unarmed, alone, seeking nothing but the chance to speak with someone, anyone. Who could explain what humanity wanted? Commander Heian Wu received the message and allowed himself a slight smile. Finally, they were starting to understand. The Council didn't get to demand negotiations. They didn't get to set the terms. They didn't get to arrive uninvited and expect hospitality. But now, they were asking. Actually asking, not demanding. That was progress. Let him come. Hyun Woo told Admiral Taeyong. It's time they learned the truth. Supreme General Krathix arrived at Earth with his shields down and weapons powered off. He broadcast the same message for 3 days straight. Hey, please. Just tell us what you want. On the 3rd day, he finally got a response. President Minji. Quan appeared on screen after 3 days of Supreme General Krathix broadcasting his plea. She sat in a simple office with Earth visible through the window behind her. She wore no elaborate robes or symbols of authority. She looked like what she was, a person who had been elected to represent other people. Krathix, in his command ship alone in Earth orbit, felt his breathing slow as he finally saw a human leader willing to speak. Supreme General Krathix, Minji began, her voice calm and professional. You asked what we want. The answer is simple. We want nothing from you. Krathix waited for more. There had to be more. Species always wanted something. Territory, resources, technology, trade agreements. That was how negotiations worked, Min-G continued. You arrived in our space uninvited. You made demands we never agreed to consider. You claimed authority over us that you never earned. You assumed we would negotiate from a position of weakness. You were wrong. She leaned forward slightly. We don't negotiate for rights we already possess, General. We don't ask permission to exist. We don't bargain for sovereignty that was always ours. You came to us believing your age gave you authority. It doesn't. You came believing your numbers gave you power over us. They don't. Krathix found his voice. But what do you want from the Council? Peace. Trade. Alliance. What terms would you accept? We want you to leave us alone, Minji said. That was our answer when you first contacted us. That was our answer when you sent your negotiation fleet. That was our answer when you invaded our colonies. And it remains our answer now. Leave us alone. But surely there must be room for dialogue, Krathix pleaded. We can establish protocols, agreements, treaties that define our relationship. Why? Minji asked simply. Why do we need a relationship with you at all? Did we ask for one? Did we seek you out? Did we request council membership or guidance or protection? Krathix had no answer. The truth was painful and obvious. The council had imposed itself on humanity, then been shocked when humanity refused to accept that imposition. Ambassador Gina Park appeared on a second screen, broadcasting directly to the council chambers from her home in Seoul. She was old now, nearly 90, but her voice was strong. Members of the Galactic Council, I spent 40 years as a diplomat. I understand negotiation. I understand compromise. I understand the value of dialogue. But I also understand the difference between negotiation and submission. The council assembly, watching from their homeworld, listened in silence. You didn't come to negotiate with us, Gina continued. You came to inform us of decisions you had already made about our future. You expected us to be grateful for the opportunity to surrender our sovereignty. You thought we would see your age and your numbers and bow. You pulled up images of human history. Wars, revolutions, independence movements. Humanity has fought against imposed authority for our entire existence. We overthrew kings who claimed divine right to rule. We defeated empires that claimed superior civilization gave them the right to subjugate others. We resisted tyranny in all its forms, whether it called itself monarchy, dictatorship, or even democracy that tried to oppress minorities. The common thread through all human history is this: we do not accept authority without consent. We do not recognize the right of the strong to rule the weak. We do not believe that age grants wisdom or that size grants legitimacy. High Arbiter Quevin, watching from the council chambers, felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had led the council for 3,000 years. He had negotiated with hundreds of species. None of them had ever questioned the fundamental premise of council authority until now, Commander. Hien Wu's fleet arrived at the council homeworld, not to attack, but to observe. 300 human ships took up positions around the planet, visible to everyone on the surface. They didn't threaten. They didn't demand. They just watched. It was the most intimidating thing the council had ever experienced. President Minji broadcast again, this time to all council species simultaneously. The Galactic Council claims to represent 847 species. I wonder how many of those species actually chose to join. How many were presented with offers they couldn't refuse? How many were told that resistance was futile and submission was inevitable? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. Humanity refuses to join because we have the strength to refuse. We wonder how many of you joined simply because you lacked that strength. Councilmember Visek watched as their entire system began to crack. Species were sending inquiries, questions about their own membership terms, requests to review treaties signed centuries ago. It was chaos. President Minji made humanity's terms clear. We will not join the council. We will not submit to council authority. We will not pay tribute, host bases, or recognize council jurisdiction over human space. These are not negotiable points. These are simple facts. Furthermore, we demand the council reform itself. Allow true independence to your member species. Dismantle your authority structure and replace it with voluntary cooperation between equals. Stop imposing your will on others and start asking for their consent. Krathik, still in orbit around Earth, felt defeat settle over him like a blanket. And if we refuse, then we continue as we are, Minji said simply. We expand our territory. We build our fleet. We exist as a constant reminder that council authority is not absolute. Eventually, other species will notice. They'll realize they have a choice. You would destroy the council. Krathix asked. Who would let you destroy yourselves, Minji corrected. The council is already dying, General. It's been dying for thousands of years, calcified by bureaucracy and the assumption that your way was the only way. We're just making that death obvious. She softened slightly. But it doesn't have to be death. It can be transformation. The council could become something better. A voluntary association of equals. A forum for cooperation, not domination. We would even join such an organization if it respected our sovereignty. High Arbiter Quevin made his decision. The council had existed for 50,000 years, but perhaps that was long enough. Perhaps it was time for something new. The vote took 3 weeks. In the end, the council agreed to dissolve its authority structure. Member species were given the choice to remain in a reformed association or leave entirely. Military forces were disbanded. Tribute was ended. Occupied territories were released. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an abdication. The council had learned that authority without consent was just tyranny with paperwork. 1 year later, Commander Hien Wu stood in the same command center where he had watched the first council message arrive. Earth had returned to normal. Human colonies continued expanding. The galaxy was restructuring itself into hundreds of independent nations, rather than one imposed order. Some species maintained the old council structure on a voluntary basis. Others formed new alliances. A few, inspired by humanity's example, chose complete independence. The galaxy was messier now. It was also freer. Former council member Visik requested permission to visit Earth. Haiyan Wu approved the request. They met in a small cafe in Geneva, two old men who had helped reshape galactic civilization. "I need to understand," Visik said. "Why did you fight so hard? You could have negotiated better terms. You could have joined the council with special status. Why refuse everything?" Haiyan Wu considered the question. "Because some things aren't negotiable. Our freedom is one of them. Our sovereignty is another. If we had negotiated, we would have accepted the premise that someone else had the authority to grant or withhold these things from us. We don't accept that premise." "But you could have at least talked to us," Visik said. "Even just to explain your position." "Talking would have been engagement," Haiyan Wu explained. "Engagement would have been recognition. Recognition would have been acceptance. We couldn't accept your authority even enough to tell you we rejected your authority. We had to demonstrate it through action." Visik was quiet for a long moment. "You terrified us. You still terrify us? A species that won't talk, won't negotiate, won't compromise on certain principles. How does anyone coexist with that?" Haiyan Wu smiled slightly. "You respect it. You don't demand from us. You ask. You don't impose on us. You invite. You don't claim authority over us. You treat us as equals. It's really very simple. For you, perhaps," Visik said. "For us, it required destroying everything we had built over 50,000 years. No," Haiyan Wu corrected gently. "It required recognizing that what you built was founded on a false premise. Better to rebuild on truth than maintain a structure built on the assumption of authority you never actually had." Captain Youngji Lee, now Admiral Youngji Lee, gave a speech at the military academy. Young officers, human and alien both, listened as she explained the war that wasn't really a war. "We didn't defeat the council through superior weapons or tactics," she said. "We defeated them by refusing to accept their framing of the conflict. They thought it was a negotiation. We understood it was about fundamental principles. They thought silence was an absence of communication. We understood silence was the clearest communication possible. The lesson isn't that might makes right," she continued. "The lesson is that some rights exist independent of anyone's ability to grant or deny them. Freedom is one of those rights. Sovereignty is another. And when someone claims the authority to decide whether you deserve these rights, the only appropriate response is to demonstrate that their authority doesn't exist." President Minji, now retired, wrote her memoirs. The chapter on the council crisis was titled simply, "No." In it, she explained her thinking. "They asked what we wanted. The truth was, we wanted nothing they could give us because we already possessed everything we needed. They couldn't understand this. Their entire civilization was built on hierarchical exchange. Someone above gives permission to someone below. Someone strong grants protection to someone weak. Someone old teaches someone young. Humanity rejects this framework entirely. We believe in earned authority, not assumed authority. We believe in consent, not compliance. We believe that fundamental rights are not subject to negotiation, debate, or conditional granting." When the council finally understood this, when they realized we would rather die free than live under even the most